The helicopter came out of nowhere. One moment, the hospital rooftop was just concrete and rain, empty, ordinary, forgotten. The next, the air split open with the thunder of rotating blades, red warning lights slicing through the darkness as a Navy helicopter descended with surgical precision. Nurses froze mid-step. Security reached for radios they didn't know how to use. Somewhere below, a man who had just been fired stood alone in the parking lot, unaware that 12 minutes earlier her life had collided with something far bigger than hospital politics. They weren't here for a patient. They weren't here for an emergency transfer. They were here for her. Inside the building, a powerful director had already moved on, confident his authority was absolute. Orders had been disobeyed. A line had been crossed. Careers, after all, were replaceable. But some decisions don't end when a badge is taken away. Some decisions echo loud enough to call in the military, and when those doors opened, nothing in that hospital would ever be the same again. Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if you're drawn to stories where justice arrives without warning, consider subscribing. Emily Carter had learned long ago how to move through loud places without making noise. At 32, she had the posture of someone who never slouched, never rushed, never wasted motion. In the trauma wing of Street, Augustine Medical Center, a sprawling Level 1 hospital wedged between a freeway and the river, she moved with the calm efficiency of a metronome. Her badge read Senior Trauma Nurse, but those who worked beside her knew titles rarely captured what Emily actually did. She saw what others missed. She remembered what others forgot. And she spoke only when it mattered. Street Augustine prided itself on speed and prestige. The walls were lined with plaques, awards, donor names, etched into brushed steel. The hospital director, Dr. Harold Whitman, liked to say they were the gold standard for urban emergency medicine. He liked cameras too, press conferences, carefully curated narratives of excellence. Emily did not fit that narrative. She wasn't loud in meetings. She didn't network. She didn't laugh too hard at the director's jokes or linger after shifts to socialize. She clocked in early, left on time, and went home to a small apartment 15 miles away, where her furniture was sparse and her walls bare. No photos, no memorabilia, no past on display. Her co-workers respected her, but they didn't quite know her. Some assumed she was burned out. Others thought she was hiding ambition behind humility. A few, mostly the newer residents, mistook her quiet for weakness. They were wrong. Emily's strength was restraint. On that particular Tuesday evening, the trauma bay hummed with the familiar rhythm of controlled chaos. Monitors beeped. Gurneys rolled. A paramedic shouted vitals while stripping blood-soaked clothing from a patient who had lost control of his motorcycle on the interstate. The air smelled of antiseptic and copper. Emily stood at Station 3 reviewing lab results with practiced speed, platelets trending low, blood pressure unstable but responsive. She made a mental note, adjusted a dosage, and handed off instructions without raising her voice. Across the room, Dr. Whitman entered with 2 administrators in tow. His presence changed the air immediately. Conversations tightened. Residents straightened. Nurses exchanged quick looks. Whitman didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He carried authority like a tailored suit, expensive, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Let's keep things moving," he said, clapping his hands once. "We're at capacity tonight." Emily didn't look up. She already knew that. Whitman's gaze passed over her, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. He had never liked Emily Carter. She made him uneasy, though he couldn't have explained why. She followed protocol meticulously until she didn't. And when she challenged decisions, she did it without ego, without apology. That kind of confidence unsettled men like Whitman. As the evening wore on, the trauma board filled faster than it cleared. Car accidents, a construction fall, a domestic assault. The ER absorbed each crisis like a sponge stretched to its limit. Then at 9:17 p.m., the double doors burst open. "Incoming trauma," a voice shouted. Male, mid-30s, found unconscious near the docks. Severe blast injuries. Unknown cause. Blast injuries. The word snapped Emily's attention up instantly. The gurney flew in, flanked by EMTs soaked in rain. The patient's clothes were shredded skin mottled with burns and embedded debris. His breathing was shallow, his pulse erratic. Emily moved before anyone told her to. She took the head of the bed, fingers already checking pupils' airway responsiveness. The man's skin was cold despite the blankets. Not hypothermia, shock. BP is 80/50 and EMT rattled off. Heart rate 130. Oxygen saturation dropping. Emily's eyes tracked every detail. The angle of the burns, the distribution of shrapnel, the calluses on the man's hands, thick old, not the kind you got from a desk job. This wasn't a boating accident. Doctor. Whitman arrived moments later, scanning the chart that had been hastily assembled. Any ID, he asked. No wallet, a nurse replied. No phone, nothing. Whitman frowned. All right, standard trauma protocol. Prep for imaging. Let's not speculate. Emily caught the slightest hitch in the patient's breathing as medication flowed. His jaw tightened. His fingers twitched not randomly but with intent, as if reaching for something invisible. She leaned closer, her voice low. "Sir, can you hear me?" His lips parted. At first, the sound was barely there, a rasp lost beneath the machines. Emily almost missed it. Almost. 6, 0, 9. Her spine went rigid. That wasn't a number spoken in pain. That was a code. Emily straightened slowly, her mind racing. The injuries, the burns, the coded whisper, the way his body reacted to certain stimuli while ignoring others. She'd seen this before. Not here. Not in a hospital. Across the room, Whitman was already issuing orders, his voice crisp and confident. "Get him to CT. We'll rule out internal bleeding, then proceed accordingly." Emily opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Not yet. She followed the gurney as it moved, her expression neutral, her pulse anything but. Every instinct she had was screaming that something about this patient was dangerously wrong, and that following the wrong protocol could kill him. As they reached the elevator, the patient's eyes fluttered open for half a second. They locked onto Emily's face with startling clarity, and just before they rolled back, he whispered again, clear enough this time to leave no doubt. "Don't let them." The doors slid shut. Emily stood there, hands clenched at her sides, watching her reflection distort in the stainless steel. She knew what those numbers meant. She knew what kind of man lay on that gurney, and she knew that if she stayed silent, she would be complicit in something she could never undo. Behind her, Dr. Whitman cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said coolly, "you're awfully quiet tonight." Emily turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," she said. But inside, the decision had already begun to form. The CT suite was colder than the rest of the hospital, the air kept deliberately sharp to protect machines worth more than most houses. As the gurney rolled in, Emily walked beside it, her gaze fixed not on the monitors but on the man's body, the way it reacted, the way it didn't. Most patients in this condition thrashed or stiffened when transferred. This one stayed eerily controlled, even semi-conscious, as if his pain had been compartmentalized and locked away. His breathing was shallow but rhythmic. Trained. Emily helped slide him onto the imaging table. When his left arm shifted, she saw it clearly now, a faint, almost invisible tattoo just above the wrist. Not decorative. Functional. A simple geometric mark that meant nothing to civilians. But to her it was unmistakable. Her jaw tightened. "Contrast ready," the tech said. "Hold," Emily replied, sharper than intended. Dr. Whitman's head snapped up. What? Emily forced her voice down. "Before contrast, I want arterial blood gases and a closer look at the embedded fragments." The pattern Whitman cut her off with a raised hand. "We are not improvising," he said. "This is a civilian hospital, Miss Carter. We follow civilian protocol." Emily met his eyes. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them. "With respect, sir, civilian protocol assumes civilian injury mechanisms. This," she gestured subtly toward the patient, "doesn't fit." Whitman's expression hardened. "Speculation is not evidence." "No," Emily said quietly, "but experience is." A couple of residents exchanged uneasy glances. The CT tech froze, caught between authority and instinct. Whitman stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't know what you think you're seeing, but you will stand down. Do you understand me?" Emily did, and that was the problem. As the scan began, she watched the monitor with growing dread. Tiny fragments lit up the image, not random debris but uniform in size, deliberately shaped. Military grade. designed to disperse, not shatter. Her stomach dropped. Those fragments, she said, unable to stop herself. They're reactive. Certain meds will enough, Whitman snapped. You're out of line. The scan finished. Orders were barked. The gurney was wheeled back toward the trauma bay. Emily followed, silent now, but her mind was moving faster than her feet. She replayed the whispered numbers, the tattoo, the injury profile, the way his muscles responded not with panic but with conditioned reflex. This man wasn't just military. He was specialized. Back in the ER, the room filled again with noise. Someone adjusted a ventilator. Another nurse called for blood products. The patient's blood pressure dipped, then recovered barely. Whitman took command like a general surveying a battlefield. Prep him for surgery. We're losing time. Emily stepped forward. Sir. Whitman turned slowly. What? If we intubate and sedate him the standard way, we could trigger a cascade. His system's already compensating. We need, Whitman said coldly, to stop indulging your theories. Emily felt the eyes of the room on her now. This wasn't a private disagreement anymore. This was public. She inhaled through her nose. Then at least let me adjust the medication ratios. No, sir, please. Whitman leaned in his voice a razor. You don't get to please your way around chain of command. Something flickered behind Emily's eyes, not anger but resolve. She nodded once. Understood. Whitman turned away, satisfied. Emily moved with the team, her hands steady as she assisted. But as medications were drawn, she saw it the dosage that would push the patient's fragile balance over the edge. Her heart hammered. She could stop it. She could also lose everything. As the syringe approached the IV line, the patient's hand twitched again. His fingers curled weakly, brushing against Emily's glove. His eyes opened just a sliver. He looked straight at her. There was no fear there, only recognition and trust. Emily's decision crystallized in that instant not as a dramatic rebellion but as a quiet refusal to be complicit. She adjusted the flow, not enough to draw attention, just enough to change the outcome. Within seconds, the monitors told a different story. Heart rate steadied. Oxygen saturation climbed. A resident frowned. That's unexpected. Whitman turned back sharply. What did you do? Nothing, Emily said evenly. I followed my judgment. The room went silent. Whitman stared at the monitors, then at Emily. You altered my orders. I prevented a crash. You disobeyed me. Emily didn't flinch. Yes, sir. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if Whitman might explode. Instead, he smiled a thin, dangerous thing. Get out, he said. You're done here. Emily removed her gloves slowly, deliberately. She placed them on the tray, then unclipped her badge and set it beside them. I'll escort myself, she said. As she walked toward the doors, she felt the weight of every stare. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Behind her, Whitman's voice cut through the air. This is what happens when you forget your place. Emily didn't look back. She stepped into the hallway, the sounds of the ER muffled behind her, and for the first time in years, her hands trembled. But even as security approached, even as her career unraveled in real time, her mind was already on the clock. 12 minutes. That was all it would take. The hallway outside the trauma wing felt unnaturally quiet. Emily Carter walked between two security officers who looked more uncomfortable than authoritative, their rubber soles squeaking faintly against the polished floor. She kept her gaze forward, posture straight, as if this were just another transfer, another controlled movement from one place to another. Inside, though, everything was vibrating. She had known the moment she adjusted the medication that there would be consequences. Dr. Whitman was not a man who tolerated defiance, especially not from someone he already considered a problem. Still, knowing something would happen was different from feeling it unfold in real time. Badge gone. Access revoked, her entire professional identity reduced to a clipped escort and a forced exit. At the security desk, one of the officers cleared his throat. Miss Carter, hospital policy requires, I know, Emily said quietly. I'll collect my things. He nodded, relieved not to have to explain. As she walked to the locker room, memories surfaced uninvited. Not of this hospital, but of another corridor years ago, narrower, dimmer, humming with generators instead of fluorescent lights. The same controlled breathing, the same understanding that hesitation killed. She pushed the locker door open and removed her jacket, folding it with care. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it yet. Instead, she sat on the bench, elbows on her knees, staring at the scuffed tile floor. She allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to feel it, the injustice, the anger, the ache of being discarded for doing the right thing. Then she exhaled and stood. Outside, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. The hospital parking lot glistened under sodium lights, puddles reflecting the building's windows like fractured mirrors. Emily stepped out into the cool air, her breath fogging faintly. That was when she finally took out her phone. No missed calls, no messages. She opened a secure app buried deep in her device, one she hadn't touched in years. The interface was plain, almost outdated. No logos, no names. She typed a short message, 6 characters, then she hit send. Across town inside the hospital, Dr. Whitman was already rewriting the narrative. In the director's office, he loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water, his jaw tight. From his window, he could see the helipad on the roof, empty as it always was unless scheduled weeks in advance. He turned back to his desk and spoke into his phone. HR. Yes, I need documentation prepared. Termination for insubordination. Effective immediately. He paused, listening. No, this isn't up for debate, he continued. She undermined my authority in front of staff. That kind of behavior spreads if you let it fester. He ended the call and leaned back, satisfied. In his mind, the situation was contained. A problem removed, a message sent. He had no idea the clock had already started ticking. Back in the trauma bay, the patient, Emily, had altered protocol for lay sedated but alive. His vitals were no longer spiraling, but they weren't stable either. The monitors told a story that unsettled the residents gathered around him. BP is holding, one said, but barely. He should have crashed by now, another muttered. Whitman strode in irritation radiating off him. What's the status? A resident hesitated. He's compensating. In ways we don't usually see. Whitman frowned. Then proceed. As they prepared to move the patient to surgery, a nurse noticed something odd. Sir, she said cautiously, his reaction to the sedatives, it's atypical. Whitman shot her a look. Are you questioning my orders now too? No, sir, she replied quickly. Just reporting. Whitman waved her off. Get him upstairs. The elevator doors closed, carrying the patient upward. At 9:29 p.m., exactly 12 minutes after Emily Carter had stepped off hospital property, a low-frequency rumble began to roll across the city. At first it blended with the distant traffic and rain. Then it grew louder, heavier, more deliberate. On the hospital's top floor, a junior administrator looked up from her computer. Do you hear that? What another replied, annoyed. Thunder. But it wasn't thunder. Security cameras on the roof flickered as wind pressure increased. Loose debris skittered across the concrete. The helipad lights, inactive moments before, began to flash automatically. In the control room, a technician frowned at his screen. That's weird, he murmured. We don't have any air traffic scheduled. Outside, nurses in the parking lot tilted their heads back, eyes widening as a dark shape emerged from the clouds, rotor blades slicing through mist lights blazing red and white. A helicopter. A military helicopter. Its descent was precise, practiced utterly unconcerned with civilian confusion. Inside the hospital, alarms began to chirp, not emergency codes, but security notifications. Restricted airspace breach. Unauthorized landing sequence. Dr. Whitman's phone rang. He ignored it. The helicopter touched down with a force that rattled windows 3 floors below. The sound was overwhelming, drowning out everything else, a physical presence that pressed into the chest. On the roof, the side door slid open. Boots hit concrete. Down in the ER, a nurse whispered, "Oh my God." Whitman finally answered his phone. "What is it now?" The voice on the other end was tight. "Sir, there's a Navy helicopter on the roof." Silence. Whitman laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's impossible." "Sir," the voice insisted, "they're asking for someone." Whitman straightened. "For who?" The answer came after a pause. "They asked for Emily Carter." The glass of water slipped from Whitman's hand, shattering on the floor. For a brief, disorienting moment, Dr. Harold Whitman thought he had misheard. "Say that again," he said slowly, as if volume might correct the absurdity. On the other end of the line, the security supervisor swallowed. "The Navy personnel on the roof, sir. They asked for Emily Carter. By name." Whitman's mind rejected it outright. Emily Carter was a nurse, a terminated employee, a problem he had already erased from the system. The idea that the United States Navy would land a helicopter on his hospital for someone like her was not just unlikely, it was insulting. "That's not possible," Whitman snapped. "There must be a mistake. No one cleared an aircraft landing." "Sir," the supervisor replied, voice strained. "They didn't ask for clearance." Whitman ended the call without responding. He stood alone in his office, staring at the helipad through the window. Even from here, he could see the aircraft, matte gray, angular, unmistakably military. Rotor blades still turning, wind whipping rain across the concrete. Figures moved with purpose beneath the spinning blades, their silhouettes sharp and disciplined. This was not a photo op. This was not a misunderstanding. Something cold settled in Whitman's chest. Downstairs, the hospital was unraveling into controlled panic. Nurses clustered near windows. Residents whispered in hallways. Security scrambled to establish perimeters they had never practiced enforcing. In the surgical prep area, the patient Emily had saved was being transferred again. His vitals fluctuated, but he was alive. Alive in a way that defied the textbook expectations Whitman had trusted. A young anesthesiologist glanced at the monitors, then at the doors, then back at the monitors. "We should wait," he said quietly. "Wait for what?" Another snapped. "For whatever this is." On the roof, Lieutenant Commander Jason Hale stepped away from the helicopter and scanned the surroundings. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his movements economical. Every step had intention. His uniform was soaked from the rain, but he didn't seem to notice. "This is Street Augustine Medical Center," a nervous facilities manager said, hustling toward him. "Sir, you can't just land here." Hale turned, his gaze steady and unyielding. "We're not here for your permission." The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again. Hale tapped the earpiece tucked beneath his helmet. "Command, we're on the roof. Initiate protocol." "Copy," came the reply. "Target confirmed, pending," Hale said. "But we're close." Back in the parking lot, Emily Carter sat in her car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. She hadn't driven away. She hadn't needed to. She felt it before she heard it. The vibration through the air, through the ground, through her bones. When the sound reached her, it was unmistakable. She closed her eyes. 12 minutes. Her phone buzzed. One message. "On site. Stand by." Emily exhaled slowly, the tension she had been holding finally releasing. She did not smile. This was not vindication. Not yet. This was escalation. Inside the hospital, Whitman stormed out of his office, his polished shoes striking the floor harder than necessary. "I want that aircraft off my roof," he barked at no one in particular. "Now." An administrator jogged to keep up. "Sir, they're armed. So are our lawyers," Whitman shot back. "This is a hospital, not a military base." As they reached the stairwell, the doors swung open, and two uniformed Navy personnel stepped inside. They moved with quiet authority, their presence instantly shifting the balance of power in the hallway. "Dr. Harold Whitman," one of them said. "It wasn't a question." Whitman stopped short. "Yes, and you are trespassing." Lieutenant Commander Hale stepped forward. "We're here regarding a patient currently in your care and a former employee you terminated approximately 15 minutes ago." Whitman's mouth went dry. "This is highly irregular. So is nearly killing one of ours," Hale replied evenly. Whitman bristled. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Hale didn't argue. He simply held up a hand. One of his team members produced a tablet and turned the screen toward Whitman. On it was a medical profile, classified markings blurred but enough visible to make the message clear. Whitman's eyes flicked over the information. His breath caught. "This man," Hale said, "is an active duty operator. His identity is protected. His injuries occurred during a classified operation." Whitman swallowed. He was brought in as an unidentified civilian, and if Miss Carter hadn't intervened, Hale continued, he would be dead. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Around them, staff had stopped pretending not to listen. Whitman recovered first. Even if that were true, which I do not concede, this does not justify military intrusion. Hale's gaze hardened. "You fired the only person in this building who recognized what he needed." Whitman scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "She disobeyed orders." "Yes," Hale said. "She did." He leaned in slightly. because those orders were wrong. At that moment, the elevator doors opened and the gurney carrying the patient emerged, surrounded by stunned medical staff. The man lay still but alive, his chest rising and falling steadily now. Hale turned, recognition flashing across his face. He moved to the gurney and placed 2 fingers against the patient's wrist, checking the pulse himself. "Good work," he murmured, not to the doctors, but to someone who wasn't there. Whitman watched his world tilting on its axis. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where is Emily Carter?" Hale straightened. "She's exactly where she needs to be." Outside, Emily stepped out of her car as 2 Navy personnel approached. Their posture was respectful, not subservient, but acknowledging. "Miss Carter," one said, "we need you back inside." She nodded once, rain plastering her hair to her cheeks. "How is he?" "Stable," the man replied. "Because of you." As they escorted her toward the entrance, Emily glanced up at the roof. The helicopter's blades were slowing now, the thunder fading into a low, watchful hum. Inside the hospital, Dr. Whitman stood frozen, surrounded by evidence of his own certainty unraveling, and he realized too late that this was no longer his story to control. Emily Carter re-entered Street Augustin Medical Center through a side entrance she had used 1,000 times before. Tonight it felt like a different building. The lobby was crowded not with patients but with silence. Conversations died as she passed. Heads turned. People who had watched her escorted out less than half an hour earlier now stood aside, uncertain whether to meet her eyes. 2 Navy personnel walked with her, not close enough to look like guards, not far enough to suggest she was alone. Their presence rewrote the room without a word. Emily kept her focus forward. Inside the surgical wing, the air was tense in a way she recognized immediately. This wasn't panic. This was uncertainty, the kind that came when established authority no longer felt absolute. "Doctor." Whitman stood near the nurse's station, his shoulders rigid, his face carefully neutral. He looked up as Emily approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're no longer employed here," Whitman said finally, each word clipped and deliberate. "You have no standing." Lieutenant Commander Hale stepped into his line of sight. "Doctor," he said calmly, "that won't be an issue." Whitman's jaw tightened. "This is my hospital." Hale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Then I suggest you listen carefully." Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing in on her chest. She hadn't come back for vindication. She hadn't come back to watch Whitman unravel. She had come back because a man upstairs was still alive and still fragile. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. A resident answered before Whitman could. "Or 2. Prepped but not cut yet." Emily nodded. "Good." Whitman spun on the resident. "You will wait for authorization." Emily turned to Whitman, then her voice steady. "If you proceed without adjusting the protocol, he will code within minutes of incision." Whitman's eyes flashed. "You're guessing." "No," Emily said. "I'm remembering." She stepped closer to the monitor bank and began reviewing vitals, hands moving with practiced ease. No one stopped her. Whitman looked around, searching for support, but found only hesitation. Dr. Hale said evenly, "We're not here to debate hypotheticals. We're here because Miss Carter acted on experience gained serving this country. Experience you do not have." Whitman stiffened. She never disclosed any military background. Emily didn't look up. "You never asked." The words hung in the air, simple, devastating. In the operating room, Emily moved back into her element with seamless precision. She didn't give orders. She gave explanations. She adjusted medication ratios, altered ventilation settings, recalibrated the surgical approach, and the patient responded. Monitors stabilized. Blood pressure held. Oxygen saturation climbed and stayed there. A surgeon whispered, "This shouldn't be working." Emily answered without looking up. "It works when you stop treating him like a civilian." Outside the OR, Whitman watched through the glass, his reflection superimposed over the scene. The hospital he had built his identity around was functioning without him, and functioning better. An administrator approached cautiously. "Sir, the board has been notified." Whitman's head snapped around. "By who?" "By them," the administrator said, nodding toward the Navy personnel. "And by legal." Whitman's stomach dropped. Inside the OR, the patient stirred slightly under anesthesia. Emily leaned close, her voice low and steady. "You're going to be fine," she said, not as reassurance but as fact. The surgery concluded without incident. For the first time since arrival, the patient's vitals settled into something approaching normal. The room exhaled collectively. As staff filed out, conversations buzzed, quiet, reverent, shaken. Emily removed her gloves and stepped back, fatigue finally seeping into her bones. She felt the eyes on her now, not questioning, not dismissive, but searching. Hale met her outside the OR. "You saved his life," he said simply. Emily shook her head. "He saved himself. I just listened." Hale studied her for a moment. "You didn't hesitate." "No," Emily replied. "I remembered what hesitation costs." Down the hall, Whitman was being escorted into a conference room by 2 board members who had arrived with remarkable speed. His protests echoed faintly, then stopped as the door closed. Emily didn't watch. She walked to the observation window instead, looking down at the patient now resting under careful watch. Tubes and wires surrounded him, but his breathing was steady, strong. Hale joined her. "You could have stayed gone," he said. "No one would have blamed you." Emily's reflection stared back at her from the glass. "I didn't come back for them." "No," Hale agreed. "You came back because you're still one of us." She didn't respond. After a moment, Hale continued, "Command wants to debrief you, offer you a formal commendation." Emily turned to face him. "I don't need a medal." "I figured," he said with a faint smile. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the distant hum of hospital machinery filling the space. Finally, Hale spoke again. "What do you want, Emily?" The question landed heavier than all the others. Emily thought of the locker she'd cleaned out, the badge she'd placed on a tray, the life she'd built on doing the work quietly and leaving before anyone noticed. "I want him to recover," she said, "and I want this hospital to think twice before silencing the people who speak up." Hale nodded. "That can be arranged." Across the hall, the conference room door opened. Whitman emerged, his face pale, his confidence stripped bare. He avoided Emily's gaze as he was led away. The balance had shifted. Emily felt it settle, not triumph, but clarity. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a slow breath. The hardest part wasn't over yet. The hospital did not return to normal after the surgery. It tried to lights, dimmed back to their standard levels, stretchers rolled, codes were called, but something fundamental had shifted. Authority no longer flowed in straight lines. Conversations paused when uniforms passed. Every decision suddenly felt heavier, as if unseen eyes were measuring it. Emily Carter felt that weight as she stood at the nurse's station, completing notes she technically no longer had access to. A temporary badge hung around her neck, now issued by hospital security at the Navy's request. It felt foreign against her skin. She didn't like being visible. Across the floor, Doctor Whitman sat inside the conference room, flanked by 2 board members and a hospital attorney. Through the glass, Emily could see his hands moving sharply as he spoke, his face flushed with restrained fury. He looked smaller somehow, contained. Lieutenant Commander Hale joined her, holding a tablet. "They're initiating a formal review," he said quietly. "Everything from intake protocol to administrative interference." Emily nodded. "He won't take it well." "No," Hale agreed. "Men like him never do." Down the hall, a group of residents whispered among themselves. One of them, a second-year surgical resident Emily had mentored once, finally gathered the courage to approach. "Miss Carter," he said, then corrected himself awkwardly. "Emily, I wanted to say thank you." She met his eyes. "For what?" "For standing your ground," he said. "Most of us wouldn't have." Emily studied him for a moment. "Most of you haven't had to yet." He nodded, understanding more than she'd expected. In the ICU, the patient still listed under a temporary identifier was beginning to regain consciousness. A nurse called Emily over. "He's asking for you," she said softly. Emily hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the monitors. The man's eyes were open now, alert despite the haze of medication. They tracked her as she approached. "You did good," he said, his voice rough but controlled. Emily checked his vitals out of habit. "You're not supposed to talk yet." He huffed a faint laugh. "Story of my life." She met his gaze. Up close, the discipline was unmistakable, the stillness, the way pain registered without taking over. "They almost killed you," she said. He shrugged as much as the equipment allowed. "They didn't know." "You did." "Yes," he said simply. A pause stretched between them. "Why didn't you tell them?" he asked. "Who I was." Emily shook her head. It wouldn't have mattered. They wouldn't have believed me, and it wasn't your job to prove your worth. His eyes softened slightly. Still, you risked everything. I risked my job, Emily replied. You risked your life. Another pause. Then, quietly, you still serving, he asked. Emily didn't answer right away. I never stopped, she said finally. I just changed uniforms. Outside the ICU, Hale watched through the window. A junior officer approached him. Sir, we've confirmed the timeline. She intervened exactly 3 minutes before cardiac failure would have become irreversible. Hale nodded. And the director board's suspending him pending investigation. Federal oversight, likely. Hale exhaled slowly. Good. At the same moment inside the conference room, Whitman realized the walls were closing in. The board chair, a woman Whitman had underestimated for years, folded her hands calmly. Doctor, Whitman, multiple witnesses confirm you dismissed clinical concerns and terminated a staff member mid-crisis. I enforced protocol, Whitman snapped. That's my job. Your job, she replied evenly, is to ensure patient safety, not protect your ego. Whitman scoffed. This is about one nurse who got lucky. The hospital attorney slid a document across the table. This is about a patient who survived because of her. Whitman's eyes flicked down. The document bore seals he didn't recognize. Federal, he swallowed. Back in the ICU, Emily finished her checks and stepped away. As she reached the door, the patient spoke again. They'll come for you. She paused. Who? The people who don't like loose ends, he said. You don't fit neatly into boxes. Emily turned back. Neither do you. He smiled faintly. That's why we survive. The hours crept past. Midnight came and went. The helicopter remained on the roof, its presence both reassuring and ominous. At 112 a.m., Emily's phone buzzed. Command requests your presence. Conference room, B. She closed her eyes briefly, then headed down the hall. Conference room B was smaller, windowless. Hale stood inside with 2 individuals in civilian attire, quiet, composed, unmistakably official. Emily Carter, one of them said, standing. I'm with Naval Intelligence. Emily didn't react, I assumed. The man gestured for her to sit. Your actions tonight prevented a significant loss. They prevented a death, Emily corrected. He nodded. Yes. And they exposed vulnerabilities. Hale watched her carefully. They want to know how far your involvement goes. Emily folded her hands on the table. As far as my oath does. The room went still. And what oath is that? The intelligence officer asked. Emily met his gaze without hesitation. To protect life, even when it costs me. Outside, Dr. Whitman was escorted out of his office, his belongings boxed by security. Cameras flashed in the parking lot as word spread faster than he could contain it. Inside conference room B, the conversation took a turn, one that would determine what Emily's future looked like from this point on, and whether her quiet life was truly behind her. Conference room B smelled faintly of burnt coffee and antiseptic, a scent Emily associated with long nights and hard truths. The 2 civilians across the table introduced themselves only by last name. No ranks. No affiliations beyond a clipped naval intelligence. It was enough. We're going to walk through the timeline, the woman said, tapping a pen once against a thin folder. From the moment the patient arrived to the moment the helicopter touched down. Emily nodded. I'll answer what I can. The man beside her leaned back slightly. You'll answer everything, he said calmly. Within classification limits. Emily met his eyes. Then we won't have a problem. They began with the intake, what Emily noticed when she noticed it, why she deviated. She explained the blast pattern, the uniformity of fragments, the whispered numbers. She described the tattoo without embellishment. She spoke the way she always had, precise, unemotional, grounded in observation. The woman took notes, nodding occasionally. The man asked questions that cut to intent. Why didn't you identify yourself, he asked. Because it would have escalated the wrong way, Emily replied. Hospitals close ranks when challenged. Titles become shields. Patients suffer. Hale watched from the corner, arms crossed, expression unreadable. And the message you sent, the woman continued. 6 characters. Emily hesitated just a fraction. An old check-in code, she said. If it still existed. It did, the man said. Within 90 seconds. Emily exhaled. Then, it worked. The woman closed the folder. It did more than work. It triggered a response chain we haven't seen activated from a civilian facility in years. Because it wasn't a civilian problem, Emily said. Silence settled again. At 2:03 a.m. the door opened. A hospital security officer stepped in pale. Dr. Whitman is demanding to speak with someone, he said, gesturing vaguely. Anyone. Hale straightened. He'll wait. Outside, Whitman paced like a caged animal. His phone buzzed non-stop, messages from colleagues, donors, a local reporter he had dined with 2 weeks earlier. He didn't answer any of them. Every screen he glanced at seemed to reflect a different version of his downfall. He had built Street Augustine on control, on rules that flowed one way, on the assumption that the people beneath him needed him more than he needed them. Tonight had shattered that assumption. He stopped pacing when the door opened again, and 2 unfamiliar men stepped out, plain clothes, sharp eyes. Not hospital staff, Dr. Whitman once said. We have a few questions. Whitman bristled. On whose authority federal, the man replied. Whitman laughed, brittle. About what? About why you terminated a clinician during an active trauma, the other man said, and why you dismissed warnings that nearly resulted in the death of a protected asset. Whitman's laughter died. Inside conference room B, the conversation shifted from past to future. There will be consequences, the woman said. For the hospital, for its leadership. Emily nodded. As there should be. And for you, the man added. Emily's shoulders tensed, though her face remained calm. I expected that. Hale stepped forward. She acted within the scope of her training, which the woman said was never disclosed. Emily met her gaze. It wasn't required. The woman studied her for a long moment. That's debatable. Another pause. Then you'll be offered protection. A formal role. Quietly. Emily shook her head. I don't want a role. The man raised an eyebrow. You don't want cover. I want autonomy, Emily said, and the ability to say no. Hale watched her carefully. He had seen operators negotiate under fire surgeons, bargain for time they didn't have. This was different. This was someone carving space for conscience. The woman exchanged a glance with her partner. That complicates things. Good, Emily said. Easy solutions usually cost someone else. At 2:41 a.m., the ICU nurse called. The patient was awake again, agitated this time. Emily excused herself and headed down the hall. Inside the room, the man's eyes were sharp despite the fatigue. They're sniffing around, he said without preamble. They're doing their job, Emily replied, checking his vitals. So did you, he said. That's why this is messy. She adjusted a line. You'll be transferred once you're stable. He nodded. I figured. They won't like you being in the open. I've been in the open a long time, Emily said. He studied her. You ever regret leaving? No, she said. Then after a beat, I regret the things that made me leave. A corner of his mouth lifted. Same. Down the hall, Hale intercepted a call. His expression hardened as he listened. Understood, he said, then ended the call. He found Emily a minute later. Command wants you off-site after transfer, he said quietly. For your own safety. Emily didn't look up from the chart. Safety is relative. They're worried about precedent, Hale added. About what happens when people like you act independently. Emily met his eyes. Then they should worry about what happens when people don't. At 3:18 a.m., the transfer arrived, another aircraft, quieter, unmarked. The ICU cleared. Curtains were drawn. The patient was moved with a precision that spoke of rehearsed urgency. As he passed Emily, he caught her wrist lightly. You didn't just save me, he said. You reminded a lot of people what service actually looks like. She squeezed his hand once. Get home. When the doors closed behind the gurney, Emily felt a hollow settle in her chest, not loss but release. On the roof, the original helicopter powered down fully. The night air reclaimed the space. In conference room B, the woman slid a single page across the table toward Emily. This is not a contract, she said. It's an understanding. Emily read it once, then again. Hale watched her closely. You don't have to decide tonight. Emily folded the paper and placed it back on the table. I already have. The woman leaned forward. And Emily stood. "I'll cooperate with the investigation. I'll testify if needed. But when this is over, I'm walking away. From us," the man said. "From control," Emily replied. As dawn approached, the hospital began to stir again, patients, waking staff, rotating, the illusion of normalcy creeping back in. But for Dr. Whitman, escorted past cameras and into a waiting car, normal was gone. And for Emily Carter, the quiet line she had always walked was about to be tested one last time. Dawn crept over street. Augustine Medical Center, in thin bands of grey and pale gold, washing the building in a light that made everything look cleaner than it was. Inside, exhaustion clung to the walls, the kind that settled after something irreversible had happened. Emily Carter stood near the observation windows on the 5th floor, watching the city wake up. Traffic thickened. Sirens faded into background noise. Somewhere people were pouring coffee, unaware that a hospital had nearly killed a man the government would never publicly acknowledge. Lieutenant Commander Hale joined her, 2 cups in hand. He offered one without speaking. She accepted it. "I don't usually drink this early." "You didn't usually have helicopters land for you either," he replied. A faint breath of a smile crossed her face, then vanished. Below them, security escorted Dr. Harold Whitman through the main lobby, not in handcuffs, but close enough that the implication was unmistakable. He walked stiffly, chin lifted, refusing to acknowledge the cameras that had already gathered outside. Donors and journalists alike had a way of sensing blood in the water. "Board votes unanimous," Hale said quietly. "Suspended pending investigation. Access revoked. Interim director installed." Emily nodded. "He'll fight it." "He can try," Hale replied. "But the paper trail isn't kind to him." Across the floor, a nurse Emily had worked with for years hesitated before approaching. "Emily," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. We should have backed you." Emily met her gaze. "You did what you could," she said. "That's how systems like this survive, by making people think silence is safety." The nurse swallowed. "What happens now?" Emily didn't answer right away. In a secure wing on the far side of the hospital, federal auditors moved through records with ruthless efficiency. They pulled logs, emails, recorded calls, every time Whitman had overridden a clinician. Every time concern had been dismissed in favor of optics. Patterns emerged quickly. At 7:46 a.m., a senior board member requested a private meeting with Emily. The conference room was brighter now, sunlight spilling across the table where hours earlier intelligence officers had spoken in measured tones. The board chair sat alone, her posture composed. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "We failed to protect our staff." Emily folded her hands. "I didn't need protection. I needed space to do my job." The woman nodded. "Which we didn't give you." She slid a folder forward. "We'd like you to stay. Full authority and trauma oversight. Policy input. No interference." Emily glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "You're offering this because of what happened tonight." "Yes," the chair admitted. "And because we don't want it to happen again." Emily finally opened the folder, scanned the first page, then closed it. "If I stay," she said slowly, "nothing changes. You'll be reacting to me, not fixing the system." The chair frowned. "We can change." "Not fast enough," Emily replied. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the unmarked transfer aircraft lifted off, carrying the patient away. Its departure felt quieter than the arrival, had no spectacle, no witnesses. Just the echo of something handled efficiently and forgotten on purpose. In the ICU, the empty bed sat clean and made as if no one had nearly died there. Hale found Emily in the stairwell minutes later. "He's airborne," he said. "Good," she replied. "They'll keep him off the grid for a while, long enough to heal." Hale studied her. "You could have gone with him." Emily shook her head. "He needed me last night. He doesn't need me now." Hale leaned against the railing. "Command doesn't like loose ends." Emily met his gaze. "Neither do I." A junior intelligence officer approached them hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said to Emily, then corrected himself. "Miss Carter, there's one more issue." She waited. "The director signed off on a data-sharing agreement last quarter," the officer continued. "Third-party analytics. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't careful." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What kind of data?" "Trauma response metrics," the officer said. "Timings, outcomes, patterns." Hale swore under his breath. That data could be reverse engineered. Emily's mind raced. Including last night. Yes, the officer confirmed. If someone knew what to look for, a familiar tension settled into Emily's shoulders. Not fear, responsibility. Then we shut it down, she said. We're trying, Hale replied. But there's a lag. Emily looked toward the roof now, empty and still. How much time? Hours, Hale said. Maybe less. Emily made a decision without announcing it. She turned toward the elevators. Where are you going? Hale asked. To finish what I started, she said. Back in the administrative wing, Whitman sat alone in a holding office. His phone confiscated, his world reduced to a glass of water and a ticking clock. When the door opened, he looked up sharply, hope flickering. It died when he saw Emily. You, he said bitterly. Come to gloat. No, Emily replied. I came to ask what else you signed. Whitman laughed hollow. You think you have the right. You signed data agreements that put lives at risk, Emily said calmly. I need to know with who. Whitman's bravado faltered. I don't have to tell you anything. Emily leaned forward slightly. You don't, she agreed. But they'll find out anyway. I'm offering you a chance to be useful. Whitman stared at her realization, dawning that the power dynamic had flipped completely. He slumped back in his chair. I thought efficiency was the same as excellence, he muttered. Emily straightened. It never is. Minutes later, as Emily left the room, Hale caught up to her. You're pushing hard. Yes, she said. Because we don't have the luxury of waiting. From the roof, a lone maintenance worker looked up as a different helicopter passed overhead, higher, faster, gone in seconds. Emily felt it like a warning. The truth was unraveling faster than anyone had planned. And the cost of last night's silence wasn't done being collected. By late morning street, Augustine Medical Center had become a study in contrasts. On the surface, the hospital looked functional again. Patients were discharged. New ones arrived. Coffee carts rolled. Doctors argued over charts the way they always had. But beneath that familiar rhythm ran a current of unease, an awareness that something powerful had passed through and left marks no amount of routine could erase. Emily Carter moved through the administrative wing with purpose, her temporary badge opening doors that had never opened for her before. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from doubt, but from responsibility. She had chosen not to walk away yet. Hale kept pace beside her, reading from a secure message on his phone. The data-sharing agreement Whitman signed ties back to a private analytics firm in Virginia, he said. Defense adjacent, not illegal on paper. Dangerous in practice. Because pattern recognition doesn't care about intent, Emily replied. Exactly. They entered a small IT conference room where 2 federal auditors and the hospital's head of information security waited. Screens glowed with flowcharts and timestamps. The problem, the auditor explained, is latency. Data from last night was already exported. We've halted further transmission, but what's out is out. Emily leaned over the screen. What exactly was shared? Response timing, the auditor said. Medication adjustments, surgical deviations. Emily's jaw tightened. Everything that would tell someone how he survived. Hale nodded grimly. Which means if anyone was tracking anomalies, they know Emily finished. The room fell quiet. At that moment, a phone rang. The IT head answered, listened, then paled. We've got inbound, he said. External query just hit our archived data. Government clearance, but not ours. Who Hale demanded. The man read the ID. Joint Oversight Task Group. Hale exhaled sharply. They don't ask questions unless they're already worried. Emily straightened. Then we need to control the narrative. Careful, Hale said. That's a dangerous phrase. I don't mean spin, Emily replied. I mean truth, clean, complete, and fast. Minutes later, they were seated in a larger conference room. On the wall, a secure video link flickered to life. 3 figures appeared, faces, neutral, eyes sharp. Miss Carter, the center figure, said, Lieutenant Commander Hale, thank you for joining. Emily met the camera's gaze. You're reviewing last night's incident. We are reviewing exposure, the figure corrected. Your intervention created a statistical anomaly. Emily didn't flinch. Because the protocol was wrong. Protocols exist for a reason, another voice said. So do exceptions, Emily replied calmly. You trained me to recognize them. A beat passed. "You are no longer active," the first figure said. "I never said I was," Emily answered. "I said I remembered." The silence stretched heavy and deliberate. Finally, the center figure spoke again. "Walk us through your decision." No embellishment. Emily did. She described the injuries, the numbers, whispered the risks of standard sedation. She described Whitman's orders not emotionally, not vindictively, just factually. She explained the unauthorized adjustment and the outcome. When she finished, no one spoke for several seconds. "Then, you understand that independent action creates governance issues." Emily nodded. "Yes. And yet you would do it again." "Yes." Hale watched the exchange carefully, noting the subtle shift in tone. This wasn't a tribunal. It was a recalibration. The center figure leaned forward slightly. "The operator survived because you broke protocol." "Yes," Emily said. "And if you hadn't, he would be dead." Another pause. "We can't condone disobedience," the figure said. "But we also can't ignore results." Emily waited. "We will classify your involvement," the figure continued. "The data anomaly will be attributed to a procedural review. The hospital director will absorb accountability." Hale relaxed a fraction. "And you," the figure said, looking directly at Emily through the lens. "You will be offered a consultancy. Off record. Limited engagements. No chain of command." Emily shook her head. "I won't operate in the shadows." The figure frowned. "Then you leave us little room." Emily met their gaze. "I don't need room. I need boundaries." The call ended shortly after, unresolved but not hostile. Outside the room, Hale let out a long breath. "You just told them no." "I told them the truth," Emily said. "They don't hear that often." Downstairs, reporters gathered near the entrance, microphones poised. The hospital released a statement, carefully worded, regretful non-committal. Whitman's name was mentioned once. Emily's not at all, which suited her. In the afternoon, the board chair found Emily again, this time without a folder. "They're moving faster than I expected," she said. "Federal review. Policy overhaul. Some donors are nervous." Emily nodded. "They'll survive." "And you," the chair said. "What will you do?" Emily considered the question. "I'll finish my documentation. I'll testify if needed. Then, I'll leave." The chair studied her. "You could change this place." "Places don't change because of people like me," Emily replied. "They change when people like you stop protecting people like him." The chair absorbed that quietly. As evening approached, Hale escorted Emily to the parking lot. The air was warmer now, the rain long gone. "They won't forget you," he said. "I'm counting on it," Emily replied. He hesitated. "You sure about walking away?" Emily looked back at the building, at the windows, the roof, the helipad that was empty again. "I didn't come here to be remembered," she said. "I came to make sure someone lived." Hale nodded once. "If you ever need, I know," Emily said. As she drove away, the hospital shrank in her rearview mirror, returning to its place in the city's skyline. Inside, investigations continued. Careers shifted. Policies were rewritten. And somewhere far from cameras and boardrooms, a man with scars and a steady heartbeat breathed because one person had refused to stay silent. The system had bent. Not because it wanted to, but because it had been forced to. The first night Emily Carter slept after leaving Street Augustine was restless. She woke before dawn in her apartment, 15 miles from the hospital, the city still dark outside her window. No alarms, no pager, no overhead codes echoing through concrete corridors. Just silence and the faint hum of traffic miles away. For years, silence had been her refuge. Now it felt unfamiliar. She rose, made coffee she barely tasted, and sat at the small kitchen table where nothing on the walls demanded explanation. Her phone lay face up beside the mug. No new messages, no summons. That too felt wrong. By mid-morning, the news cycle had moved on. Headlines framed the story carefully. Hospital director suspended amid federal review. No mention of helicopters. No mention of classified patients. No mention of a quiet nurse who had been fired and reinstated in the same hour. Emily preferred it that way. At 1017 a.m., her phone buzzed. Board hearing confirmed. 2:00 p.m. Your presence requested. She stared at the message for a moment, then replied with a single word. Acknowledged. The boardroom at Street. Augustine was full by the time Emily arrived. Lawyers lined one wall. Administrators filled another. The board sat at the long table, expressions grave, careful. No one looked relaxed. Dr. Harold Whitman sat at the far end, flanked by counsel. He looked older than he had 2 days ago, shoulders sagging, eyes dulled by the realization that control had slipped through his fingers. When Emily entered, the room went quiet. Whitman didn't look at her. The board chair cleared her throat. Miss Carter, thank you for coming. Emily nodded once and took the seat offered to her. She folded her hands on the table. She had no notes. She didn't need them. The proceedings were formal, procedural dense, with language meant to shield institutions from blame. Emily listened patiently as timelines were recited, policies cited, responsibilities defined. Then the chair turned to her. Miss Carter, please describe the moment you chose to alter protocol. Emily met her gaze. I didn't choose to alter protocol, she said calmly. I chose to prevent harm. A murmur rippled through the room. She continued unflinching. Protocol is a tool. When it stops serving the patient, it stops being ethical. Whitman's lawyer objected. The chair raised a hand. Let her finish. Emily did. She described the injuries, the risks, the certainty, not emotional, not intuitive, but learned. She did not mention her past unless asked. She did not accuse Whitman directly. She didn't need to. When she finished, the room sat in silence. Finally, Whitman spoke. His voice was hoarse. You undermined my authority. Emily turned to him. You mistook authority for infallibility. Whitman bristled. Hospitals cannot function on individual judgment. They can't function without it, Emily replied. The chair exhaled slowly. That will be all. Emily stood. As she turned to leave, the chair added, For the record, your termination is formally rescinded. Emily paused. Thank you. She did not sit back down. Outside the boardroom, Hale waited. How'd it go? It ended, Emily said. That's enough. He nodded. There's one more thing. He handed her a sealed envelope. No logos, no return address. What is it? Emily asked. A letter, Hale replied. From him. She didn't need to ask who. Emily opened it in the hallway, the paper crisp and heavy. Emily, they tell me I should apologize. I don't know how to do that without defending myself, so I won't try. I believed rules were what separated chaos from order. I was wrong. I mistook compliance for competence. I don't expect forgiveness. I wanted you to know I understand what I cost. H. W. Emily folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet finality. Do you want me to? Hale began. No, Emily said. It's done. That afternoon she returned to the hospital one last time, not to the boardroom or the OR, but to the ICU. The bed where the patient had been lay empty. Fresh sheets, clean monitors, no trace of the man who had nearly died there. A nurse approached, eyes uncertain. Emily, are you coming back? Emily shook her head gently. No, the nurse nodded, swallowing. Then, thank you. Emily smiled, small and sincere. Take care of each other. As she left, she passed a group of residents clustered near the elevators. One of them, the same second-year resident, caught her eye. You changed things, he said quietly. Emily met his gaze. You'll change more. Outside, the sun was bright the day, indifferent to the weight of what had passed. Emily walked to her car, placed her keys on the roof for a moment, and breathed. Her phone buzzed once more. Transfer complete. Patient stable. He asked us to say thank you. Emily closed her eyes. Good, she thought. As she drove away from Street, Augustine, for the last time, the building receded into the skyline, not as a monument, not as a battlefield, but as a place she had passed through when it mattered. She didn't know what came next, only that whatever it was, it wouldn't require permission. Emily Carter didn't announce her departure. There was no email, no farewell rounds, no quiet lunch with co-workers who suddenly wanted to know her better. She had learned long ago that clean exits mattered more than dramatic ones. On her final morning in the city, she woke early, packed the last of her things, and left the apartment exactly as it had been when she moved in, minimal, functional, untouched by nostalgia. The lease would end. Someone else would fill the space. Life would continue. It always did. She drove without destination at first, letting the highway decide. The city thinned into suburbs into open stretches of road. The radio murmured news she didn't listen to. Her phone stayed silent. For the first time in years, no one needed her urgently. That afternoon, she stopped at a small roadside clinic, 2 exam rooms, a waiting area with mismatched chairs, a faded flag out front. A handwritten sign in the window read, "Temporary closure, staff shortage." Emily sat in her car for a long moment, engine idling. She turned it off. Inside, an exhausted receptionist looked up in surprise. "Sorry, we're not taking walk-ins today." "I'm not a patient," Emily said. "I'm a clinician." The woman blinked. "You're serious," Emily nodded. "Trauma trained. I can help for the afternoon." The receptionist didn't hesitate. "Please." Emily washed her hands, tied her hair back, and stepped into a room that smelled like antiseptic and dust. The equipment was older. The charts were paper. The cases were ordinary sprains, infections, chronic pain. But the people were real, and they needed care. By sunset, Emily's shoulders ached in a way she welcomed, not from conflict, from work. As she left, the receptionist pressed a slip of paper into her hand. "We can't pay much," she said, apologetically. Emily smiled. "You already did." That night, miles away in a secured military facility, the man Emily had saved sat upright for the first time without assistance. His wounds were healing. Slowly, correctly. A senior officer stood beside him. "You're lucky," he said. The man shook his head. "No," he replied. "I was prepared." "Prepared for what?" "For someone to recognize me," he said. "Before it was too late." The officer studied him. "She didn't take the offer." "I didn't expect her to," the man replied. Back at Street Augustine Medical Center, renovations began quietly. Policies changed. Oversight tightened. New directors spoke carefully about culture and accountability. But the staff remembered something else. They remembered the sound of rotor blades. They remembered the moment authority failed and integrity didn't. They remembered the woman who had stood still while everything around her shifted. Emily never returned to that hospital. Instead, she moved between places that didn't make headlines: rural clinics, understaffed ERs, temporary disaster response units. She left before people could ask too many questions. She didn't correct assumptions. Let them think what they wanted. One evening, months later, her phone buzzed with a single message. "Still standing because of you. Hope you are too." Emily read it once, then deleted it. She looked out over the parking lot of another small facility, another quiet place doing its best. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep orange and purple. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Somewhere else, someone waited to be seen. Emily turned toward the door. She had never wanted recognition. She had never needed rank. She had only needed one thing: to be allowed to do what was right when it mattered most. And when the moment came, she had. That was enough. Sometimes the most dangerous word in any system is protocol. Not because rules are wrong, but because people forget why they exist. Rules are meant to protect life, not replace judgment. Titles are meant to guide responsibility, not silence conscience. Emily Carter didn't win because she had power. She won because she accepted the cost of doing what was right when no one else would. She stood alone, knowing she might lose everything, and chose integrity anyway. Real courage is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for permission or applause. It shows up quietly, acts decisively, and walks away without asking to be remembered. If this story resonated with you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe stories like this matter, consider subscribing. You never know when the next one might remind you who you really are.